Glad you are here. Are you glad you're here? All right, great. Wow, we have a good group. I see faces I've seen in some other sessions too. That's always good. All right. Are you having a good time here? Super, super. So, how's the food? Too much, right? Too much. I told the other group this. We arrived on Saturday. The team had to come in early because we had a lot of little things to get ready. And but anyway, the team arrived on Saturday, and I told the team, I said I came in and we have a scale in our room. Do y'all have scales? Thank goodness you don't. If you, we do. And so we have a scale in our room. So I got on the scale. I've gained a kilogram. That is a lot of weight, and it's not over yet. So I'm really, really concerned. I'm concerned. I've gained a kilogram in just a couple days. Anyway, so we need to be careful here. The food is just rich and full of calories, and it is good food. It is. So it's quite nice. All right, here's what we're going to do. How many of you, I want to ask you a few questions first of all. We are a team. We're going to be working with you. And I'm Ruby, and you are? And you are? So we're happy to be here and be your team. I'm starting out, then I'm going to turn over to Mick, then Sebilu, and I'm going to sleep while they're presenting, and they'll sleep while I'm presenting, and we gotta figure it out here, because nobody sleeps here. You go to the night market after you're done. Who went last night? Tell truth. Nope, nobody. Who's going tonight? 1, 2. Oh, yeah, good. I'll probably see you there. I think I'm going to go too. All right. So anyway, here's what we're doing. We really want to look at the whole issue of preparing foster, adoptive, and kinship families. The disruptions that occur in this field are really sad. Children who've been victims, children who have really hoped for this family to be a family where they can stay, where they can live, where they can grow up, suddenly to find themselves in disruptions back in the system again. It's devastating for them. There are a whole lot of issues related to why that happens. Many places that I work in, and I work in 32 countries around the world, many places where I work don't really prepare substitute families. They don't prepare kinship. They don't prepare guardians or foster families, or sometimes they don't even have those. But when they do, they don't often prepare them. How many of your countries prepare your foster and adoptive families, kinship families well? Anybody? Couple. And I ask, well, you think you're really doing a really good job. So that's great. I got about 3 people. How many of you have families that are systems that don't prepare at all? Okay. That's really more common. That's what I find. Is that what you guys find as well? Okay. So when we look at this, I think this comment is a really important one. Every child deserves a prepared family. Would you agree? All right. Then we're going to change the paradigms. We're going to be those change makers. We're going to lead the charge to make sure that we take the message home that if we're going to be working to help children have the most important goals of their life, and one being safety, the next being permanency, and the third being well-being, we want families that can provide that. We want families that are prepared to do exactly that. The issue is that many of our families have a heart of gold, right? They really want to do this. And I can remember in Ukraine a number of years ago, we did a training at a camp where there were foster and adoptive families, 100 and some families that would represent a lot of children, 200 adults. And the message that the church had given these families, all you have to do is to love the child. Have you heard that message? That message is a message that's given all the time. Is love enough? No, it is not. It is not. It is a factor. It is an important factor. But it's not enough. We need prepared families. And in looking at that prepared family is going to understand how to provide for that child's safety, permanence, and well-being. And they're also going to be honest and open with what are their own strengths in bringing a child into their family. What are some of the areas of need that they need to develop in order to be a strong family? They're going to be aware of the fact that things happen in the family that are difficult and understand that they may need to ask others to help them. So there are so many things that we have experienced as we have worked the globe, the three of us, and have worked in situations where families have not been prepared and they're trying to prepare them and do better. So the dilemma, if we look at the dilemma here, first of all, is that we in many of our countries do not have laws that are clearly defined that really talk about a system of excellence. How many of you have really great child welfare, foster care, adoption, kinship laws? Anybody? Couple people. Yeah, a couple people. So, well, we can say then, essentially, for this room and the countries represented here, we can do better. We can do better to have those laws that support, that even say that training is not an add-on, it is a critical component and a responsibility of leadership. That's an interesting one. Number 2, looking at the dilemma, cultural norms and traditions can be a hindrance to really preparing a family. Make sense? What happens? What might be happening that would be a cultural norm or a hindrance that really gets in the way? Yes, thank you. And what was the last part? Oh, yes, exactly. So their motivation. So we're looking at some of and we see this in Central Asia where we have a lot of work. We do a lot of work in Central Asia and have a program there that we have heard many times. A family will say, well, I am coming to pick up a child. I want to adopt a child that is a boy of about this age because he can help me out in the mountains with my sheep. Okay. So we begin to look at that. It's a dilemma. Another dilemma that we have is that the awareness of the need, not only the need of the fact that we need families, but the need of children, the needs of children is really limited. What do children need to grow and to be healthy and to get all the things that they need? Another one is that countries continue to love their orphanages. Do you, any of you, I'm not going to ask you to show hands on this one, but do you live somewhere where they love their orphanages? That we have countries that do. They're so proud of them. And so it's a dilemma. It really is a barrier in order to really provide for some of the resources that children need to really get into families. And the other side of that dilemma is that not only do they love to continue to want to use their orphanages, they don't have even the teams there to really do the work that would allow us to reunify children or to get children into kinship care, guardianship, or into foster care adoption. They just don't have the capacity. They don't have the people. It's really a dilemma. Do you see that a lot too? Ethiopia as well, it's like a really big problem. Minimal attention is given to prevention, reunification, and permanency, essentially. I have worked in many countries, the 32 countries we work in, and many of them believe, child safe, got them picked up off the street, and it's like, goodbye, done. No work being done as well. So minimal attention to prevention, minimal attention to reunification and to permanency. And reunification can occur if persons are willing to put the work into assuring that children, that's what they need, and looking at reunification or even in terms of permanency in another way. So another dilemma that we look at as well is that children who need families are coming from a history of trauma, and that history causes all kind of concerns for families. How many of you were in the trauma training with me? A lot of I see faces here that were in the trauma training. Okay, what we looked at, and you've already had trauma training, many of you. What do we know trauma does? Trauma changes behavior. Trauma alters the architecture of the brain. And as a result of that, when that happens, we see behaviors, we see things that children think, do, and believe that are challenges for families. And so when we look at this, one of the dilemmas is that it causes great concern. If I bring this child into my home who's experienced trauma, what am I doing? How difficult is that going to be? Difficult, definitely. Am I ready for it? Am I equipped for it? Preparation, we've got to prepare. And the last one that I have for you is to look at the collaboration between the church and the state. Listen, I know this might be sometimes things that government doesn't want to hear. I believe the answer to the foster care crisis, the orphan crisis, is the church. I believe it 100%. It's not a social issue, it's not a government issue, it's a church issue. But at the same time as I believe that, there's responsibilities of government to be able to support the right kinds of laws and standards so children can get into families. The dilemma that we experience is that many churches don't see themselves as being part of the orphan crisis. They understand James 1:27, but that's for you to work on, rather than this is really the church's issue. So that disconnect is really something that often causes some real concern and problems. When we look at understanding preparing children, we have to understand what is the right continuum. What's the best place for a child to grow up? The family, exactly. And if that isn't the case, we have to look at, there's a natural continuum that we should be able to see our governments, see our programs looking at as being, there is a systematic, clear picture of what's best. If that doesn't work, where do we go from there? It's called the Continuum of Care. So let's take a peek at it. First of all, what we look at is we look at the very first idea, and this is a little bit hard to see, so make it a little bit bigger. Okay, the Continuum of Care. The first thing that we see is that we want to keep kids at home, prevention. So we want to use those gatekeeping services and those ways that we can ensure that children be able to stay with their families and divert them into a situation where there's permanency within their family, within their biological family. So if we look at this, what happens is that as we look at the continuum of care, permanency, intervention, diversion, gatekeeping strategies and services need to be in place. From that, if we go over here and we look at what's an ideal. Ideal is that we have kinship care, and I would move these around, kinship care as the ideal, high quality kinship care, and foster care as a second to that. Make sense? Okay. Then I go on and I look at, what if that doesn't work? Okay, where would residential care, you see there is a drop down here. When would residential care be one you jump into quickly? What do you think? That jumps in pretty fast. There has to be a real clear reason. You're not coming up with one. But what if we have a child that really definitely has some kind of a need, that we've got a temporary opportunity for that child to be in a residential treatment program, which we may not have in our countries, but that specifically is going to help that child to begin to heal in that particular issue and to prepare that child to move into a foster family. There may be a time and a use for that interim of care. So when we look at this, we want to make sure we're not jumping out of anything, we're not closing everything, but we're looking at, there is a progression that is in place right now that's accepted, and we want to just know what it is. So kinship care, foster care, and what we look at here is permanency plan for the child is always to, in foster care or kinship care, can we get that child back with their permanent family? Is that possible? Guardianship falls in there. Many countries don't do foster care, but they do guardianship. You have that in your country? Some countries. When we look at this and it's not possible, another part of the continuum is that there should be a permanency plan for adoption if it's not possible. And what we also know we have post-adoptive services for placement services in place. Now, I moved that really quickly, but I want you to understand that every one of us have to understand what is the progression in our country. What do we have in place? How can we make it better? How can we make it closer to the family of origin? Keep it as close to the family of origin as we can. And not only that, how do we prepare everybody, the workers who are placing children, making those decisions, as well as those families who are receiving children that are coming from those hard places and need those places of safety in a temporary or in a more permanent adoption situation. Okay, questions? With respect to that? Make sense? I've given you a handout, and I want you to just look at it for a minute. It's a handout that's called Critical Competencies for Pairing Foster Kinship and Adoptive Families. This particular handout is one that when we look at a competency begins to tell you what you need to be aware of if you're going to foster, adopt, or be a kinship caregiver. A competency tells you what you need to know and what you need to understand about that. A competency should tell you what you need to be able to do. So there are layers in competencies, and those layers of competencies help us to know what training to put into place when we understand what do you need to know and understand and be able to do that you can't do right now. So there's an assessment that can go with that in working with the family. If they've gone through a training, what was the training? They're aware of trauma. Well, do you know and understand the impact it has on the brain? No. Well, then we need training on that, because that's a perfectly a clear example of something that's needed by all. Do you understand child development? No. Well, that's a training that's needed then. Can you take what you know about child development and apply it to strategies to help a child grow and develop? Oh, don't know that. Able to do. So, well, we need a training about that then. So we need to be aware of things, lowest level of understanding of our brain. We need to be able to know and understand why that is important and how it works. And then we need to know how to apply that to the real world of working with children that would be coming into my home. And then the last level of competencies would be, if I practice this, I do know how to do it, it is part and parcel to my normal interactions with children, so there's a level of competence that comes with it. Make sense? So competency-based training, preparing a foster and adoptive family through competency-based training, is a science. It has methodology that you can learn and you can use in your programs to know where people are in their level of development and what might be next as a result to where they are right now. Isn't that kind of exciting just to hear that? It can be really exciting. I want us to be really smart, and you've got two people here that are really going to help us look at that are very smart to do that. We're doing it, all of us, between the three of us all over the world. Not that we're brilliant or anything like that, but we have experience. I guess that should be better than saying we're smart, right? That's a little proud. They're smart. I just happen to run around a lot. Anyway, so let's continue. So as we continue, I want to get Mick up here right away. I want you to think about the strategies that we've talked about leading to permanency. How many have had any experience with gatekeeping? Yeah, several of you. That's good. Family strengthening. Have you heard that word before? Getting into family strengthening. These are all really important concepts, and they all have with them things that we can teach others about, and we can prepare them to say, hey, let's keep kids at home. Let's do the gatekeeping strategies. Let's look at how do we help kids get to the right place, that we're really those protectors of decisions, and we know how to do that. And let's look at the family, and how do we dig in the families and be solution focused and help families to know how to create safety plans as well, and get strong where they find crisis coming into their families and be able to walk through that. Restoration and reunification, we probably hear a lot about. But when looking at a family, we shouldn't ever give up on them. Have you ever had crisis in your family? Some of you, you must be resilient because you're here. So the crisis didn't get you, did it? You got the crisis. Well, restoration is like that. You know, Carl Rogers says every family has a desire to be all the best they can be. They have solution patterns as well, and they have strengths. All we're looking at is let's prepare them, help them, give them hope to look at how do they become part and parcel to restoration as well as reunification if they're working with children who need them. Guardianship, legal custody, and adoption, all terms, things that we are going to be looking at as we learn and as we grow in the different competencies. Finally, I give you the most important thing that I shared with you in the beginning, is that love is not enough. It is not enough, and kids need families. So when the child is loved, it meets needs, there's no question. When a child is unloved, it shuts a child out and it pushes them away. But when your child has love, but is not getting the other behavioral developmental strategies applied to their life, that help their brain develop and new neurons connect together and heal their trauma, we're missing the opportunity to truly serve that child. Love is not enough. We have to be prepared. We have to be prepared. Okay, any questions, comments? Mick, is this where you're taking over?
Yes,
I think so too. Woohoo, there you go. Well, if not, you'll make it look like it is. So there you go. Okay, there you go.
On the next one. Is it just that? I've never used this before, so I'm okay. Oh, okay. So which is forward? That one. Backward. Okay. Okay. I'm here. Right. Fine. So my name is Mick Pease from the UK. Can you all hear me okay? I'm not too sure how much to have that. Is that too loud? Yeah, a bit there. Is that okay? That's good? Okay, I'll try and hold it there. So, yeah, Mick Pease from the UK, and this is the first time Ruby and I have ever worked together. I've known of her for a long time, and she's known of me for a long time. Our paths have never really crossed until now. And Sebilu I've known about, but I've never met him until now. Well, certainly never worked with till now. So this is all a new experience. My experience is, and we all have experiences which are relevant, which bring us to this place right now. Mine is that I grew up in a working class family where my sister was put in an orphanage, a medical orphanage, for health reasons, because mum and dad didn't have the funds to be able to support her at home in the 50s because of her bad health. So I think we heard yesterday, somebody was saying, I think it was on a video, wasn't it, about if the circumstances had been different, my sister would never have gone to an orphanage, and we would have grown up together. But we had about 4 years apart. That's another story, it's not for now. But we all have experiences which we bring to this place right now, and they are relevant, they're true, and they are powerful. And we've got to think, how can we begin to apply that? So, jumping a way forward in my life, I finished up in residential care. Working in residential care for the first time in my life, thinking, I'm a parent, I've got 2 kids, I pretty much have got this nailed, I've got a load of compassion, I'll be okay with these. Of course, I get put into a teenage unit, boys and girls, 16 of them, up to 18 years of age from 13. My kids at the time were 6 and 7. So although I've got kids, it's not particularly relevant because I've never worked with teenagers before. 3 years, the hardest 3 years of my life. 3 years, closest to a mental breakdown I've ever had. Seriously. I would escape the moment I could, and I had no idea why this was happening. Jump forward 3 or 4 years later, I go to university to get qualified as a social worker. And I'm sat there in the lectures, and I'm hearing these people speak, and I'm thinking, ding, I get it. Ding, I get that. Ding, I get that. The light's coming on. I'm thinking, I wish I'd have known then what I'm now learning. We talk about preparation. This is the value of preparation. We all have valuable experience we bring to the table. Jumping forward a whole load more years, I then finished up working for the City of Leeds Children's Services in England, which is about the second or the third largest city in England. And then I find my way into fostering and adoption and kinship care over many, many years. And I'm beginning to learn the value of preparing and families. When I hear Christians, I come from a Christian background, I say, all you need is love. Well, that's what the Beatles sang. All you need is love, da, 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 da. Absolute lie. It isn't all you need. You need a heck of a lot more. A lot more. In the city council, obviously, being government, they never said all you need is love. That's churches that say that. But what the council said was this. This is what the original statement was. If you've got space in your heart, emotional pull, and space in your home, you can be a foster carer. Not too far removed from all you need is love. Trying to make it a little bit more manageable. Jumping forward many, many, many years later, when we didn't really train our foster families or adopters much at all, this is what we now use. This is a little bit outdated, actually, but this is our book of competencies. We call, I've now retired from the council, so I don't work with them anymore, the skills to foster care. And these go through a lot of the things that Ruby was talking about, and I'll refer to them in a few moments, but it goes through different stages of what you need to know, because if you're going to come into this line of work, you have to realize looking after other people's children is very different to looking after your own children. Even as a married couple and families are childless and they want to come because they want to foster or adopt, and I get that and I understand it, and that does not disqualify you in the slightest, you still need to learn a lot of stuff. Because looking after children in general is hard work. Looking after other people's children is even harder work. Putting other people's children with your children is even harder work. You've heard of sibling rivalry, yeah? Brothers and sisters, well, you intermingle kids from children's homes who've had traumatic experiences and had whole loads of separation and loss and thinking, who am I, where do I belong, who is mine, and that competition intensifies. So these are issues we have to raise with families who are thinking of going into this line of, when I say work or vocation, about looking after children. The value of preparing your families is crucial, crucial. If you don't do it, you may well get away and strike lucky here and there because they're an exceptionally good family. But our experience is, if you don't do it, more than not, you are high risk of placement breakdown. And there's another session, I think, tomorrow about how do we reduce that, and I'll be talking about that, and some of that will be some of this as well. So, okay, right. No. Sorry, wrong one. I don't learn quickly, obviously. That one. No? Is that the right one? No, it's not. That's yours. Back. That's the one. So, what I will say is all families who come to you looking to foster or adopt or kinship care bring with them relevant experiences. It's their own experience, their own personal experience, and it will be valuable and it could be relevant, but we have to extend that. They can do that, not necessarily through looking after their own children, that can be part of it, but it could be through doing volunteer work. It could be maybe through their employment. So what we find in England is that a lot of people who come to us have already got some interest, and they're showing that by the work that they do or their volunteer work that they do in the communities. I'm just thinking about what to say so I can keep it concise. Sometimes, have you ever seen this in a community? You'll find a family who, for some reason or other, they are legitimately an attraction for other people's children. Yeah? You seen that? And it's like, who are these children? Oh, they're my neighbor, and they just drop them after school, and I look after them until their family comes back. Potential. That's relevant experience, because you think they're doing that without knowing anything that I know, but they're doing it for the value and the protection of other people's children. That's telling you something. So I have a phrase which I use regularly, which is you always have to look for clues. The clues are there. The thing is, do you pick up on them? That's a key of being able to actually work with families. And so we've also got to realize when we're preparing families, I'll come on to training in a few moments very quickly. When we're preparing families, it's about training. But it's training before, so they know a lot of what to expect, what's going to be different, what's going to be difficult, where they go for help, what kind of help they may need, the challenges they're going to face. But it's also training after they've had a child placed. And this often is what gets missed out. If you don't train before, you're risking breakdown. If you don't train afterwards, then you're reducing the growth of competence, the skills, the knowledge, because the people, having got the child, now need to do what I did when I was in residential care. They need to think I see this behavior, but I don't understand why it is. Let me give you an example. One of the things we hear regularly when you're working with families and children is that the vulnerable children, the abandoned children, the orphan child, will often give the mother a hard time. The mother. Why do you think that is? Pardon? Not necessarily. It could be. It could be. My mum, and I struggle with this one. I really do struggle. My mum let me down. What about the father letting me down? The father lets down as well. With the moment he leaves and disappears, he's let the child down. The mother is left literally holding the baby. But yet when that child then goes into an orphanage, it's usually the mother that will take them, or maybe an aunt or a grandmother. It's usually the female. And so then when a child goes into a foster home, guess who that child is going to go for? Mother. And when they're getting rid of their baggage and their hatred and their anger, that's where it'll often be focused, apart from the fact that often the man is outside of the home anyway. It's the mother at home. So we have to say to foster mums, adopters or foster mums, beware. You may get the focus of their anger, but they're trying to release it to someone. They're trying to give it, but it's often generated by the child's own feeling, sense of rejection by their own mother. There's things like that you'd never normally think about, but we talk about in training. So post-training, I've done this a lot. When we're going to visit families, we'll visit them in the community, and we'll say, what is it you're struggling with? And they'll say, the child's always having a go at me. They're so angry with me. One minute they love me, then they don't love me. What have I done wrong? I've only tried to help. And we're saying you're building trust with that child. The child is giving you that anger. But if you see it as an outlet for the child, that's the benefit of it. Hopefully that carer will then say, I understand. Now I understand, I'm more able equipped to be able to accept that and not feel rejected myself because I know what's happening. The value of post-training. It may be that somebody gets, a family wants training post-placement for many other issues. I want to know more about trauma, like Ruby was saying. What's this I keep on hearing about? Attachment. Attachment, effectively, we're talking about significant primary relationships. Yes, we say attachment, but that's what we're talking about. Separation, what's that? And loss. I've lost. What's that effect on that child? So there's lots of issues we need to talk about with a carer, and it doesn't all come in one attempt. It's a process of learning. Are you with me? Is it making sense? Do you understand my language? Do you understand my accent? Am I speaking too fast? Okay. Be prepared to listen and learn. I've worked with so many carers, sadly, that are not prepared to learn. You know, I know it all. I've got it. They don't say that, but by their actions, that's the message I'm picking up. You're not prepared to listen and learn. And then you apply that knowledge. Right, okay, moving on quickly. So, before receiving a child, are you keeping a time check on me, Ruby? Anybody keeping a check? Bear with me. Okay. Quickly moving on. Always made an assessment of a family, a family assessment before the child is placed. Never after the child is placed, before. Always do an assessment of the child. That is for another class, really, about how you do that. That's much more detail, but you have to do that. That will minimize the risks. Matching child to family. What kind of child could go with what kind of a family? It's one of the areas of adoption, particularly, that is different to normal biological life. You don't get to choose your biological children. None of us. Ever. But in adoption, you can. So one of the differences. In foster care, it can happen, but not always, depending on the kind of foster care that you're doing. Community environment. What do we mean by that? When we're working with a family and we're doing an assessment of a family, we'll always ask them to do an eco map. You know what an eco map is? Anybody here an eco map? No? Yeah? Good. One or two. Single. Family in the middle. Big circle outside, and say to the family, in your times of anxiety, of stress, of rejection, in your lows, who do you go to? Forget the child at the moment. You haven't got the child. Who do you go to? I go to my mum. Great. Put her there. What about my aunt, my best friend? Okay. Practically, who do you go to when you've just found some really upsetting news? Who do you turn to? Oh, I turn to my best friend, or I turn to my pastor. So you gradually build up in their own network of community who are their sources of support and strength that they turn to when they are in need themselves. So would that then apply if we place a child into your family home? Would that same thing apply? So now we're looking at their network of support services that will be outside of me, my organization, my local government. Yeah? You getting that? We call it an eco map. Call it what you want. And then we can also, in the assessment, look and train the families, identify what are their specific training needs. What I needed when I was in residential care was how to look after teenagers. How not to engage them in antagonistic behavior. How not to press the red button. When they're trying to press my red button, in those days, I would walk straight in there and press their red button. And then they would press mine, then I would press theirs. You know, and we're escalating the tension. What I needed to learn in those days, and I was 30 years old and I didn't know because no one told me, I need to learn how to de-escalate. It's all about preparation, training, fine? I'm flying through this, but it's probably not flying through. When and how does training take place? During assessment of carers. For me, assessment is always a two-way process. When you're sat in the family's home, prospective family home, and you're finding out about them, that is a really good time for you to also share with them knowledge that you have that you know they need to understand. It's a two-way process. I call it information giving and information receiving. That's assessment. It's never just one. It's certainly never just information getting. If you do not try and help them understand issues at that point, you're missing a trick, and a very important trick. Training before children are placed, we will always have group sessions. It can be as big as this, it can be smaller, but where people will come together and hear people like myself. I've done a lot of this, and we also always use existing foster carers or adopters. Always, we will involve them in the training. So they're experienced carers who feel comfortable talking to others can join us, because the people who are sat, let's assume you're all potential foster carers, and you're hearing me talk, you'll say, it's okay for you, you're the social worker. And I'll say, if you don't believe me, speak to a foster carer. Tell them what you know. Am I right or am I wrong? And everybody will listen to her rather than listen to me, because she's the one that's actually been through it herself. That's where everybody will gravitate to. So if you have experienced adopters that you want to train, or if you're doing foster care, bring those people in, because they're a valuable asset in the training process. Flying through, how long have I got? I'm good. Okay. Am I okay? I don't want to take any, right, okay. What I want to do is I'm just going to, there's lots more I could say, but I'm so conscious of time. People say, what topics do you talk about when we're doing the training? These are a few of them. These are the competencies that we'll talk about. National laws. You need to know what your national laws are. I haven't got this on the screen, sorry, but I've got handouts if you want them afterwards, I think. How do children actually find their way to a foster carer? How? Through the government? And if so, why are the government taking the children away? What are the issues that's driving it? What's the difference between a child coming to me through the government or a child coming to me voluntarily? Big difference. If a child's coming to you through voluntarily, parents still retain legal responsibility for that child. If a child's coming to you through the government or the courts, then there is a court order, which means the government or the courts are now taking responsibility. Big difference, because that indicates what you can and cannot do as a foster carer in terms of the decisions that you're making. We have to talk about these, otherwise foster carers are just left floundering, not knowing what they can and cannot do, what their role and responsibility is. If you think of it in terms of work, if you go to a new job and you don't know, and you're sat behind your desk or you're doing what you're doing, you're thinking, I don't know whether I can do this. Someone comes alongside of you and begins to say, you can do this, but I wouldn't do that. That's you beginning to learn and grow in your occupation. Same thing with foster care and adoption. Things like reunification, what on earth does that mean? What on earth does attachment mean? This is a big one. Carers will say, why are you even thinking about birth parents' involvement in my family, foster care family, when the child's been removed from the family and put with me? Why are they involved? Are they going to come and are they going to turn up at my house and go, what happens if they arrive and take the child away? What do I do? Big issues. We have to prepare the families for these issues, because otherwise they never get spoken about. What are the effects of neglect on a child's development? What is the effect on that? Ruby's already talked about that, their brain development. Why is their behavior different to my children? Because I tried this tactic with my child and it worked, but I've tried with this child and it doesn't work. It's so different. Why? Because this child has gone through trauma and negative experience. Their normality is very different to your child's normality. You get that? What is normal to your child is healthy, hopefully. What is normal to that child, sadly, is very unhealthy, and they've had years of that unhealthiness, which has led them to behave differently. So as a carer, be prepared to accept that their behavior is going to be different to yours. Woo! am I talking too quick? I feel as if I am. English tend to speak slower than Americans. I'm not too sure. Just finally finishing off, helping children to learn to manage their own behavior. We have to get beyond, I told you not to do that. No, how many times have I told you? Sometimes foster carers would say to me, Mick, I am fed up of saying to my child the same thing over and over and over again. Repetition. It's almost like they don't want to listen. And I said, oh yes, they do want to listen, but repetition is the mother of learning. You say it long enough, they'll absorb it. You didn't have to say it as long with your child because they knew what was coming. That child does not know what's coming because they've lived in a very different environment until they arrived here. So when you're saying this to them, they're thinking, I haven't a clue what you're talking about, because their environment is different. And they also probably don't feel safe. So repetition, you have to be prepared to your foster carers to say, repeat it, repeat it, repeat it, until it doesn't matter how long, just keep on saying the same thing, providing it's the right thing, of course. Cultural issues in placement. Understanding the difference and diversity, particularly in this day and age, is so important when we're having white foster carers in England looking after black children, Asian children, people from the Middle East, people who eat differently, who sleep differently, who act differently, who have different face, and it's so important. I had a foster carer who never ever had an Asian person in their home, and one day we placed an Asian child with them. And she says, Mick, I don't even know how to cook a curry. Rice and curry, never had it, never in my English family's foster carer. So the girl was 8, and we said to the girl, do you know how to cook curry when you're with mum? She says, yeah, I've watched her enough times. So, well, please show the foster carer how you cook curry. She even took the foster carer to a halal meat butcher to get the meat, to get halal meat. And she said, brilliant. And those two had a wonderful relationship for the period of time that child was in that carer's home. So we have to, for me, preparation and training is before, during, and beyond placement, and it always is ongoing. It's never a one-off destination. It's not an event. And if we're not prepared to do that, to support our carers, and actually therefore will affect the best outcomes for the child, we are missing some big tricks, and we're creating further uncertainty about that placement for that child. Any questions? Or maybe at the end, because I've gone on long enough. So, this is Ruby talking about some things. I'm talking about things that we do in the UK, and I've talked about this kind of thing in much more detail in many, many countries, cross-culturally. But Sebilu is the guy who's making it happen in his context. Seeing it happen in England is one model. You can't export our model, but what you can do is take key components of that model and attach it to your program that is culturally relevant and contextually relevant. You can't just do a cut and... Did you say cut and paste? Early on, somebody did this morning. Somebody said you can't just copy and paste. You can't. No, it's this morning. You can't just copy and paste. You have got to say, copy, get it, that, and then make it fit your own context, and that's what this guy is doing. Over to you, Sebilu.
Thank you, Mick. Yeah, so I better start with the context that I would be covering. And I'm from Ethiopia. I work for Bethany Christian Services. And my talking points are basically our experiences of program development in Africa and a bit in the Caribbean. So I've worked with Bethany for the last 8-9 years, where we have worked in developing a foster care / adoption programs in Ethiopia, Ghana, Zambia, South Africa, and Haiti. So in these countries, we don't have very much developed strong government systems for family-based care. And neither do we have the culture of foster care and adoption in the community. And in much of the context that I'm talking about, we have strong kinship care programs. And with kinship care, I'm talking about informal kinship care. And so trying to develop a program that has laws and policies and involves government and brings a lot of accountability into the new family, it takes a different path. And so my talking points are for situations such as ours in Africa and the Caribbean, where you are trying to develop a program almost from nothing. As we say in Bethany, we're trying to build the road and drive on it at the same time. So we don't have a road built that we can drive on. We're trying to build the road ourselves and trying to make sure that it fits for other actors who can also use that. So I'm going to talk more about expectations of foster slash adoptive families and how to make sure that you are trying to make sure they understand the program, this new program, and making sure that they have the right expectations. In Ethiopia, for instance, when we started our very first program and did our very first placement in 2010, not so many people knew about foster care. We don't even have a term for foster care in our language. We use foster care, the English term. And many people asked, what is foster care? How is it different from adoption? How is it different from kinship care? And the level of awareness was almost non-existent. So we're trying to really tell people, this is what you need to know. They didn't know that they had to fulfill certain criteria or meet certain criteria to be able to be approved as foster parents. They didn't know they needed to provide medical certificates or a clearance from police regarding their criminal history or anything around documentation. And that I remember families asking, why would you ask me to provide a medical certificate? Nobody asked me for my biological children. And they thought it was a mistrust and that they were not eligible to be parents for this new child. And so those kinds of expectations are things that you want to clarify at the beginning so that families have the right expectations, that they are going to interface with the child welfare system, although it's not so much strong and something that has resources to support them. So we start with, these are the needs of children, and you are getting yourselves into meeting those needs. The needs have been well explained by Mick and Ruby, and we try to make sure that they have the skills and the knowledge to be able to meet those needs, as opposed to coming with just motivations around, I am willing to care for this child and provide love and care, but we're focusing on, are you equipped for that? And those come with making sure that you're deconstructing certain wrong expectations that they bring when they come to the program. The other thing I want to talk about is the support that we need to provide. I'm just skipping slides for the sake of time. In many of the cases, for instance, in one city that we started our program in, they were the first foster carers / adoptive families. And they had no support, neither from the government nor from the churches. So what we tried to do was to make sure that they have a support system. And by support, we go beyond letting them know about the laws and the policies and the expectations and what they're accountable for and how they can support the children and how they can seek help. But we are focusing on how they can build their own community. And so what we try to do in Ethiopia, in Ghana, and South Africa is to help foster parents and adoptive parents create their own community within their cities. So it could be in the form of neighborhood groups, Bible study groups, and also making sure that they have regular events that they can gather in and talk about their challenge and their experiences as foster parents and adoptive families. And we organize family fun celebrations. They come together as foster parents and they have mini workshops and They also are introduced to other foster parents in their community, and they are also introduced to some of the experts, some of the social workers in the community, because we don't have strong government systems to help them consistently. So they also get some spiritual support through their churches, through the pastors. And we have found that to be a very instrumental for the success of the placements. And the ongoing support, although it comes from our social workers who support the families along the way, as Mick said, even after the placement, but the spiritual support that they get from their communities, whether it's from their peers or whether from their pastors, is also critical to the success. So as we do that, we try to make sure that we are also responsive to the context. In Ethiopia, we call our program Foster to Adopt. And in much of the world, foster care is a temporary placement. But what we have discovered as we began our program in Ethiopia was that most families were open to care for a child permanently. So it was against the culture to say, oh, you have this child only for a year or 6 months. And many were asking why. I want to care for this child for forever. I like him, and I feel like I'm equipped to do that. And so we said, we immediately had to change. Not even a year after we began, we changed it from foster care to foster to adopt. So every family that comes into the program comes with this mind that they're going to start with foster care, but they will end up adopting the child. And that has been a critical aspect of our success in Ethiopia, because the foster parents have time to bond and attach with the child and learn more through that period of foster care before they eventually decide to adopt the child. And the success rate has been so far 95%. So we've placed over 450 kids, and most of them, like more than 95% of them, are willing to adopt. And they are at different stages of the court process. The rest 5%, they make the decision to be permanent, what we call like permanent foster parents. So they would have the same rights as adoptive children, but they make the decision to remain foster parents because of issues with extended family or issues of inheritance that they need to sort out with extended family. But the rest 95% are adopting the same children. So what we've learned is to be responsive to the culture and the context. Although the law says that foster care is a temporary care, we have used that as a gateway, as an intermediary program to build, to take us to permanency. And that is something that also we have exported, I would say, for lack of a better term, to other countries in Africa where the culture is similar, whether it's in Ghana or South Africa. I don't think I have used the content on the slides, Robbie, more. I would end with, so as we prepare families, whether it's through training, support groups, or ongoing support even after placement, the effects of that we've seen, and over the last 10 years, is that has significantly reduced disruptions. And the fact that we have also been responsive to the culture in the communities has also added to that. When we said yes to families who were willing to adopt the child, and that when we build the skills and competencies of those families, it has reduced the disruption rate. I think out of the 450 that we've placed, we have only had 10 disruptions. And we've learned from those disruptions. And we have continued to make sure that right before the placement, during the home studies and assessments, that we have incorporated what we have learned from those disruptions. We have also seen how to support families in attachment and bonding. And there are cultural ways to enhance that, whether it's a spiritual resource we can provide or whether it's building the support that could come from the communities around. And that has also increased the success rate. As I mentioned earlier, we don't have strong government systems that support families. So we are trying to make sure that whatever we do not just helps the very families that are involved in the program, but it also helps the program development and for the government to use it to build the infrastructure for family-based care. And our experience has come to be a forefront model in Ethiopia to a point now that it has become a model for the entire country of Ethiopia. And Ethiopia is the second populous country in Africa next to Nigeria with over 100 million people. And that model has been adopted for the entire nation and has been included in the national policies and directives. So whatever we do, and we had that privilege of being the first one, the pioneers, to build a model, and that has been taken up by the government to be used for other actors. And we have also seen the advantage of using resources from other agencies. We have used experiences from the UK. We have had trainers who have come from the UK to train our social workers. We have used Ruby and her ministry. Some of our social workers have attended her training. We have had some people come over from South Africa to train us. South Africa tend to have a much more developed government systems. So we have used resources from other places to support the program development in Ethiopia. So I think this may apply, especially for my African colleagues, this may apply in other contexts where we can pool resources from other places to support program development. I think that's all from my side. So maybe you want to wrap it up?
5 o'clock. Oh, wow. Good. Well, I don't know about you, but it's really exciting to look at some of what we know works. And it's really, your data is really good, Sebilu. It's really good to hear that and hear those numbers and how the disruptions have been reduced. One of the things you've heard, and wrapping up a little bit, is that you've heard that preparation is critical in terms of how we select. We need to have processes in place, but in addition to that, we need to prepare that family before they're ever receiving a child. And you heard Mick say very clearly, and we're in concurrence, all of us, with that agreement with that preparation is not the end of the training that a family needs. So during that time of placement, when that child is growing with the family, different issues are surfacing, the family's checking the relationships of their birth children or other children, along with all of the different changes that are going on in the family, additional training needs to continue to go on. You know, many families have children and they believe that everything is great because children seem to settle in and it's quiet for a little while. And then after a while, there are little issues that surface. Maybe there's a fire setter, or there's a child who's having difficulty sleeping, a child that they've been now diagnosed that has autism. There are all kinds of issues. So that now requires a level of training that is different than the pre-service training that was offered. So that's ongoing. And then in addition to that, we know that when children come into care, that they then themselves begin to have that moment of time when their underlying hurts begin to surface, and that we begin to see things in children that really surprise and puzzle a family. And they're really deep questions, and the family's questioning if they really can move forward, if they have the capacity to work with those issues. So the family themselves, not only learning about the child and those issues, learning about themselves and how to care for themselves, how to pay attention to being healthy and whole so that they can be healthy dealing with wounded children, and to ensure that they're taking care of their family and meeting their own family's needs and their own personal growth and development needs to ensure that the wounded are not leading wounded, that we have healthy families working with wounded children. So training is something, and capacity building of an individual is an ongoing process for as long as you are going to live, not just being a foster and adoptive family and kinship family, but in life in general. You can add anything you want. So, so why don't you do it right now?
One of the issues, a big issue, is safe caring. When you're looking after your own children, you know what is safe caring, because you've got your kids and you know how they operate and they behave according to mum and dad's rules, so you know how things work. You start putting children in who had the opposite effect in their own lives, where they have not been safe and they've been abused, they've had sexual abuse, physical abuse. They come from a very different understanding. Now, when you're now placing children who've suffered sexual abuse in particular, and you're placing that child into a family, we have to prepare the family on how to look after that child safely and how to protect herself and her husband, couple, if you're married, how to protect your own children in the home without giving a negative picture of the child, because the child is the victim of other people's irresponsible behavior. So we don't blame the child is the victim. And then we even got to think beyond that. How do we manage that child's behavior in the community? Kids go out to play. And how do we manage that child's behavior who's been sexually abused at school? Without going out to everybody and saying, hey, watch out with that child because they've been sexually abused, they may play with you. Be careful, without doing that. Right? So these are real issues we have to work through with the carers to say we have to be sensitive. We don't want to re-traumatize the child. But we want to equip the carer in how to look after the child who's been abused carefully and safely within the home and outside of the home. There are strategies. And unless someone sits down and talks that through with the family, they will never know. And then the accidents will happen. And they have far-reaching consequences. So this is the value of training. And that's just one issue, particularly on safe caring.
Excellent, Mick. Thank you. As we kind of wrap up, and we'll hear from Sebilu here again as well, I just want to sort of tie it all together. First of all, we've thrown a lot of ideas out to you. We've given you competencies to think about and ask yourself, what do we have going for our systems that are preparing foster and adoptive kinship families in advance? That's a question to ask yourself. So what do you have? What do you need? It's really important that you do an environmental assessment within your region and community. Who's doing what? Who has some of those training programs that you might be able to access and collaborate? That's that broad scale collaboration again. But in addition to that, I want to let you know that three of us, and with those that we represent and the people that we know, can also help to direct you to competency-based curricula. Curricula that is standardized, that can be presented with efficacy to ensure best practice and evidence-based or evidence-indicated strategies. And having said that, you keep in mind is that there are many things out there that are flavors of the month. There might be things that just sound good, but they are not going to give you what the broader society that is working within the evidence-based materials and the research that really give you those best strategies. We have to be very, very careful. So we call on those persons that are doing that. They're out and know the field. Call on any one of us and let us help direct you and get you to those particular areas. I want to give you one little challenge on that before I go to the summary slide. The challenge is this, is that we are hearing a lot today about evidence-based practice, correct? Okay. I want to give you three terms that I think we need to know as we are in the positions and the authority of choosing capacity building training initiatives to come into our systems. Evidence-based means that it has gone through rigorous trials where there is a control group that gets the practice and a control group that does not get the practice to indicate if it's their evidence that it works and it actually has any kind of a help for that particular issue. Evidence indicated is that those issues have not gone through the rigorous trials, but professionals who work there, who understand the practice, can see the evidence in the practice that is indicating that it would have been evidence-based, but it's evidence indicated. It appears to be there's enough going on that's saying it's a practice that's helping children heal. And then there's best practice, and that comes from our body of practitioners over the globe that are working much like the evidence indicated, and they see again and again doing this with a child, working this way with a child begins to really clearly be a practice that is the best of what we know in working with attachment, working with child sexual abuse, working with child development. Now, in our science, in our practice, evidence-based strategies are harder to find than evidence indicated or best practice. And there's a reason for that. Don't get tripped into thinking everything is evidence-based. In order for it to be evidence-based, essentially, if I have children who have experienced trauma and are experiencing all kinds of manifestations as a result of that trauma, and I want to apply strategies to help them heal and move into a better pathway. In order to be evidence-based, I have to choose a control group of children that have those practices and give the strategy to them, and then choose a control group of children that have those issues and withhold from them. Do you see the issues of ethics here? So in our science, because it is a soft science, we are going to miss a lot of evidence-based kinds of research. It's not going to happen, and I don't think it should happen, honestly. So let's be very careful when people are talking evidence-based. Sometimes they spit it out, but the question I go back to, are you sure that kind of research has been done? If it has, it sounds really scary to me. But I don't want to miss the fact that we do have a responsibility of what we bring to our system to ensure that it is not like an ice cream social, a flavor that just sounds good, let's try it today, and don't like that ice cream, I'll try something else tomorrow. You with me? Let's be serious. Let's follow the science. Let's follow the practitioners who have been in the field for a long time and look for the evidence indicated and the best practice material and not get tripped up into something that is just sounds good and it's a flavor of the month. Just because somebody wrote a book does not mean it's a good strategy. Anybody can write a book and it can sound exciting, but it doesn't mean it's necessarily good for children. So in summing up, and then I'm going to turn to Sebilu to actually close this, Sebilu, or whomever wants to. I just want to go, one thing first of all. Looking at the comprehensive preparation, we've heard clearly in summary that we need a solid system of laws, policies, and procedures. We need standardized recruitment practices and clear picture of what the preparation is. We need a comprehensive competency-based training program that really, every time it's delivered, we know we're getting that particular standard delivered. We need supportive strategies in place for pre-placement and post-placement. We need an environmental assessment that I just talked about that knows what the strengths are and also it's completed so we can share that with families. And we need to be connected to the international standards of care, what I've just shared with you now. I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues here because I think there may be some questions, and whomever would like to lead the question and answer period, everybody is pointing to everybody. Guys and gals, we have 3 minutes, so who would like to do this? Are there any questions? And then I'll divert them to the gentleman. They can answer them. Are there any questions? Any thoughts? Any comments? Yes, a question, please, here.
So we start a new program 3 years ago, faster but self-supported. Now go back to all the equipment and PPE and preparation. We want to actually ask how to balance when children now is really needed. We haven't really prepared our families.
That's such a powerful question.
So the balance of not scare the people away, especially right now, we are ready to actually reach out to churches. But yet we want to communicate the fact that, and also assure them that we want to equip them. So is there any wisdom and experiences that in this space that we can actually?
Well, I'll respond to that. That is really critical. Y'all heard the question. Did y'all hear it? Looking at how do we present children without scaring our families away, et cetera, et cetera. What we have discovered in North America is that we want families to make an informed decision. And you can't make an informed decision if you don't have full information. The worst thing that can happen is that we victimize children again if we don't give the family informed decision, and then that disruption occurs, they're a victim again. So in doing that, there is the old practice we used to call it screening. So we would have a family apply to be a foster adoptive family. We would do the family home study and the assessment, which was a one-way deal. And then what we would do, we would screen them in or screen them out. That's the language we used. We, as a process of time, began to see that was not best practice. The best practice is when you can bring a family in pre-service, give them all the information you have. What have the children experienced? What is their life potentially like? What are some of the really difficult times you might have, what it might be like? And to give them a full complement of information from the things that are difficult as well as the things that bring joy and pleasure. And also, what is it like to work with this agency? What is it like to work with us? So they're hearing about us, and essentially they're making a choice. Do I want to be a foster family? Am I ready to be an adoptive family? Or should I wait? Maybe I can do respite care. Or I don't want to work with that agency. I don't like some of their laws and some of the things that they require me to do, or their guidelines, their policies. So the family is now being seen as having the potential to make a good decision for themselves. And they can only do that if they have full information. The other side of that of selection is that we also are making that decision too, through the preparation and training and through giving them the information, their reaction, their comments, their questions. So now it's become a cross-reference of mutual selection. They are selecting us or not, or we're selecting them or not. Make sense?
And one of the ways we do that is by doing, that is probably the biggest reason we do training before child. So we've done training before, then we've done it during assessment, and then we've done it after. That's how we've done training in the past. What we've been doing recently, over many years now, is train from the moment we get an application. We do an initial screening. Have they got the basic structures in place to become a carer? And just check that out. Now we move them into assessment, and whilst we're doing the assessment, we bring them onto a training plan. And during that, that's almost like an opportunity to self-select out when they hear about the issues. Particularly as one guy said to me when I was doing training and I started talking about allegations. What happens if the child alleges that you interfered with them? And he said to me, is this the moment when we're expected to leave the room? And I said, no. Surprisingly, nobody ever leaves the room at that point. You would expect them to, but we said we're being real and honest, and that's why we use foster carers to say, I'll tell you what it is going to be like. The foster carer or adopter will tell you what it actually is like. Now you can decide, is this something you want to continue with or not? So gradually they're picking up the messages as they go through the process, so it's not a sudden end of the line, oh, I didn't know that. If you'd have told me that then, I wouldn't be here now. So that's the value of the lead up to it. It's crucial to it. But never to scare them, but to be real and honest. Moving back to you.
I think we're good. That was excellent question. Maybe we could take one more, and then then we need to close. Yes.
So I was curious, is it Sebilu? Am I saying that right? Two things from what you shared is you talked about families who were more eager to adopt, so they were looking for permanent placements, and I'm curious if that made older children that maybe are less likely to want, like the harder kids to finances, resources before they began taking steps. And I'm just curious how your development of your foster care agency either coincided or preceded what the government did. Like, did you have to go first and then they joined, or I just would love to learn more about your process.
Very good question. So I think you really nailed it with the first question, that the fact that we have families that are open to foster and adopt kind of gravitated towards the smaller, healthier children. And not only that, there's a very highly skewed preference towards girls than boys. I don't know if it is a global thing, but for some reason in our cultures, people tend to think it's much more easier to raise girls than boys. So we have high disproportionate number of boys in the same age group that needed to be adopted. So we had a special advocacy program for boys. But we still struggle with older children, both boys and girls, and children with some medical needs. So what we have decided as an agency was to not overburden the families or not oversell it to a point where then we have more disruptions and then it's going against the program. So that continues to be a challenge and something that we want to address gradually. And we have now started with children that are HIV positive. We thought that was kind of an easier group to advocate for before we jump into a more, with children with severe medical needs. So that's will continue to be part of the process, but something that we're aware of and we're trying to be intentional about it. With the second question, I think what I have seen working in many countries is that you do it, you show the government, and then they will listen to you. If you wait on the government to act, I think it takes forever. And I would say all governments are inefficient and they are very less responsive. So it's important that I think agencies, churches, and NGOs take the initiative and demonstrate that it can work. And that has how it worked in Zambia. I'm sure you might have heard it from the other presentation this morning, and how it works in many developing countries. And governments usually follow the evidence and best practice. And I think NGOs play a critical role in filling that gap. And I would say that that's probably our niche, where we can really say, and to Ruby's point earlier about churches being the answers to the orphan crisis, I think that also speaks to our mandate as the spiritual community to meet the needs of children, not just from the physical, emotional aspect, but also spiritual.